Yes, it's John G. Sutton here. Welcome to Tales from the Jails. Today I want to talk a little bit about my encounter with a man who was absolutely notorious in his day and on whom film characters have been based. He was in his day known as the King of Soho. He run 19 at the time in the late 60s, early 70s. There were apparently 24 strip clubs, dens of prostitution and vice, so I'm told, in the 1960s, 1970s, and he ran them. He ran 19 of them, actually. And his name was Bernie Silver. And in 1975, I was working at the Scrubs, Wormwood Scrubs, when he was there, serving a term of imprisonment. At the time, he'd been convicted of the murder of a man called Tommy Scarface Smithson, uh, along with his accomplice, a man called Mifsud, who was a Maltese runner of prostitutes. And apparently Tommy Scarface Smithson had attempted to start running prostitutes in London himself and had ended up on the slab thanks to Bernie Silver, the King of Soho. So anyway, I met Bernie Silver when I was in the Scrubs. He was located in the hospital unit, and I was the officer in charge of the hospital ward one night. I have told this story before, but I'll tell it again. Yeah, for your benefit, ladies and gentlemen, seeing as you like tales from the jails. Anyway, here we go. And I was in the hospital ward. Now, you're sat in the hospital ward and you're supposed to stay awake and watch over the inmates, make sure there's nobody murdering anybody else or generally misbehaving. And if they are, then you've got to deal with it. Yeah. Anyway, I was sat in quite a comfortable chair, and it got to be about, I don't know, 2 o'clock in the morning. I'd been awake, you know, making sure that everything was okay, which it was okay. It was quiet, and I must have dozed off. It'd be about 3 in the morning, 2 in the morning, something like that. I just, as you do, you would do, yeah. And I woke up, and there was somebody sitting on my knee. They had their arm around my shoulders. They obviously just sat down and got hold of me like that, and they were attempting to French kiss me, tongue in my mouth, yeah. Well, not quite, because just when it got to about there, I, I woke up. Obviously, there's something on my knee. I woke up, grabbed this. Well, I didn't know who it was. I grabbed him by the hair and it hit him. Listen, here's a tip: if you're going to deal with somebody, slap them. It usually works. You don't have to hit them. You do that, and you do it properly. You're going to break something: cheekbone, eye bone, nose bone, teeth. They're going to be seriously injured. But if you slap them, just like that. So I just go over there. Yeah, nice bright slap to the side of the head, and he starts screaming. It was bloody Bernie Silver. Kiss me, kiss me. Bang! Yeah, didn't do any damage, like big handprint on the side of his head, but no real damage. Just threw him to the floor. So yeah, I don't know what had got into his head, but I certainly wasn't taking part in that. So that was my first encounter with Bernie, the King of Soho Silver. What he'd been doing was he'd been controlling the prostitution and the pornography market in Soho by paying off the vice squad. I think it was Chief Superintendent Bill Moody had been on the pay books. There were two commanders commanders, next to the commissioner of police, who were in prison. Certainly the one I met was Commander Drury. I think he was doing about 5 or 6 years, and he'd been segregated. Obviously he was not safe to be put onto normal location.
Please would you pick up the telephone?
He wasn't safe to be put on normal location because the inmates would have ripped him apart like a tandoori chicken. Seriously. And Commander Drury was on the segregation unit at the Scrubs. He didn't say much, he was very quiet, very subdued, a broken man, And when he went down for his breakfast hard-boiled egg, the staff had always written on his head, "Bent Copper," which, I mean, it's just an unnecessary form of torture, in my opinion. And I did feel sorry for the guy, but obviously he'd been taking money, from Bernie Silver and his accomplices, including Mifsud. And these, I mean, they didn't just run it by bribing the police; they ran it by violence as well. And people like the Cray twins and all that, they would be part of the protection team that actually Bernie Silver would be paying. And eventually it all came crumbling down. There was a big investigation into corruption in the Metropolitan Police in, I think it was 1972. And by 1975, there was over 100 police officers, mainly detectives and members of the Vice Squad and all the rest of it, that had been forcibly retired, or pushed into early retirement, or in the case of Commander Drury, prosecuted and imprisoned. And that's where I saw Commander Drury, who, as I say, was a sorry figure. In fact, I'll tell you this is a strange fact. Commander Drury was in the cell next door to Ian Brady. Now, Ian Brady, he was a weird bastard. If you were on duty in the seg unit, which I quite frequently was, don't know why I'd get sent to there. Maybe I was being segregated myself. No, seriously. And the seg unit, and he was in the cell next door to Ian Brady. And Ian Brady used to just sit in his cell at night. Seriously, sit in his cell at night, and they got a little Judas hole. Yeah, he'd sit with his chair directly facing the Judas hole and stare at it. So you'd come round here, maybe hear you coming, you see. But every time I looked through the Judas hole, just slightly catch back, Ian Brady just sat there looking straight at you. And I thought, he can't possibly be doing this all night. So I very quietly went round the cells, and there he was, sat absolutely still, staring at this Judas hole. Really spooky bastard, I tell you. And he never spoke to the staff. He would only speak to governors. Speak to the doctor, but he wouldn't speak to prison staff. He thought that was beneath him. The staff didn't get their hands on him, I'm sure that a lot would have, if you think about it, he's an obnoxious bastard who'd murdered them children. Strange thing about Ian Brady is another strange fact about my connection with Ian Brady and the Moors murders. My father, who was a detective inspector, was on the case. He was in court when Ian Brady was tried, and he was in court when they played the tapes of the little girls screaming and crying, "Please let me go back to my mummy, I won't tell anybody." And he murdered them, and then he buried them on the moors, and him and that wicked bitch Myra Hindley sat on top of the graves where they buried the children on Saddleworth Moor, sat on the rocks next to the gravestone. They're the graves that acted as gravestones, and they had a little picnic. Isn't that nice? Ian Brady, And somebody asked, you know, did he scream when he was attacked? Because they tried to relocate him onto D-Wing, and he lasted 2 days. They found him in the one of the recesses. Somebody battered him and poured boiling water all over him, and he was a mess, screaming, but he wasn't crying, screaming a lot, you know, like you do. Ian Brady. So that's today's little instalment of Tales from the Jails. The day I was French kissed by the King of Soho. Never going to sleep again in that ward. Never again. I hope, but I never will. Anyway, don't forget, folks, have a look on Amazon. The name of the book is Psychic Screw, and the author is John G. Sutton. That's me. Thank you, folks. Or subscribe if you're new here. That's good. Helps me a bit, I believe.